Hi everybody, welcome to Saturday Live at the Backyard Bird Center. Hope you saw my post yesterday about the snowy owl that had spent the entire day on the roof of the headquarters building up at Los Bluffs National Wildlife Refuge. Caused quite a stir. A lot of people rode up there to try to see her. They assume it was a immature female. We don't know 100%. I'm going to talk about that in here, but these snowy owls are fascinating birds. They captivate people. People love them, and whenever they are in the area, then people want to go find them. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk about the birds, the biology of these birds, when they show up, where you best can look for them, and also we're going to talk about please to respect these birds deserve when they're here, and encourage you not to try to approach closely like some people. It is sad whenever these birds just get totally harassed when they're here and they can't get any peace. But first off, let's talk about the bird. The snowy owl is an amazing creature. They nest at the top of the world. They're what we call a circumpolar species, meaning that they occur up at the top of the world all the way around the planet. And when they nest up there, and they move south. They tend to move south post-nesting. Not all the birds, some of them can endure those incredible winters up there where they nest, but a lot of the birds move at least south into Canada and North America, and of course Russia and European nations and things like that, being circumpolar. But in our area, we get reports of snowy owls, at least a couple every winter. It's almost without flaw. We get, maybe out in Kansas, maybe up in northern Missouri, over in eastern Missouri. Sometimes they show up. Many of you will remember the winter of 2011, 2012. We had the major eruption, as it's called, and we had 5 or 6, maybe even 7 snowy owls around Smithville Lake that year, and people got to see them. Normally the Eagle Days in January that happens every year, that ended up being snowy owl days because there were hardly any eagles around the lake that year, and everybody's attention was focused on the snowy owls. And let's see, got some pictures I think from that. This bird was on a chimney of a house there around Smithville Lake. A really dark bird, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then here's one that same year that was on the rocks down by the shoreline of Smithville Lake. So, okay, what do we know about these birds biologically? Well, we know that adult males are very, very white. They have a little bit of black speckling, but those older birds are stunningly beautiful. They're really, really white. We don't get to see these birds as often as we do the immature birds, those darker mottled ones like those last 2 pictures. This bird picture was taken out at Smithville Lake several years ago, so they do occur this far south, but more commonly we see the birds that are more mottled in color and speckled, and these tend to be female and immature birds. And from what the experts tell you is that you really can't responsibly tell them apart, an immature female and an immature male from an adult female. It's very hard to do that. One thing an assumption that's fairly easy to make is that if it's a really, really dark bird, then it's probably an immature female. But without scientific data, catching that bird and taking a swab, we don't know 100% that that's the case. But we've learned a lot about these birds over the years. Classic teaching has always been for us, the biologists who study birds, is that the reason these snowy owls are this far south is they're under really high stress because food failure on their native grounds, wintering grounds, and that's what's pushed them this far south, and they're usually starving to death when they get here. Well, we've actually had to back off of that now, because one of the great programs that I've attended in the last few years was put on by a gentleman I knew from Pennsylvania, my days in Pennsylvania, Scott Weidensaw, who is one of the founders of a program called Project Snowstorm. And I want to go to that. I think I've got let me see if I can't get this to show up here. Yeah, Project Snowstorm. This is their website, and it's a nonprofit group that studies the snowy owls and the snowy owl movement. And one of the great things that they have started is some of this absolutely state-of-the-art tracking mechanisms that the trackers they put on these birds that gives us far more detail than we've ever been able to collect from these birds, because those new data collection mechanisms ping off of cell phone towers and from satellites. And so they're able to track these birds far more detailed than we've ever been able to do. And we're learning a lot more about snowy owls in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years now from this group, and it has been amazing, the details that are coming in and what we know about these birds now, so much more. And there's so many cool things to talk about them, but one of the things that struck me whenever Scott did his talk, the Audubon dinner, was we typically see these birds sitting along the shoreline, like that picture at Smithville Lake, or we see them sitting on the roof of a building like up at Los Bluffs this week all day long. And we think, that poor bird, you know, he's starving to death. We haven't seen him fly one time. Well, one of these trackers now, that the mechanisms they have on them, they attach to them, is they're learning their hunting techniques. And these birds, especially that occur near the Great Lakes and around bodies of water and on the East Coast, Atlantic coast, what they've learned from these trackers is that at night they fly out and kill and eat ducks and other waterfowl out on the water. And so while we're not seeing them move during the day, they're moving at night and feeding at night. And then during the day, they're digesting while we're seeing them sitting still thinking, oh, that poor owl, you know, he's not getting anything to eat. But it's amazing the data that's coming in on these birds. So we're putting more transmitters on birds. We're getting more data, you know, about where they're nesting and their movement during the nesting season. If they stay within, you know, where they can actually get data from them. The other thing that happens to these transmitters is they're solar powered, and of course these birds that are so far north that they don't have enough sunlight to power the transmitters, and it goes dead. And so these birds will disappear for, you know, half a year or sometimes over a year until they move back into enough solar power region to charge it back up again, and then they start collecting. And so they've had birds reappear after a year and a half or 2 years, and they are able to pick them up and pick their movements up and piece their story back together again. But if you go to their website and check it out, projectsnowstorm.org, and you can read all kind of accounts that they've got on these birds and their movement, and it's just amazing. And I love the story Scott had was that they had a bird that was moving a little bit a day north, and he said, the joke among them was that this bird's going to walk back to Canada, you know, and actually what they figured out was it was actually riding on snowpacks in the Great Lakes, and so it was that real slow movement of the snow-packed ice moving north. So it's all kind of great stories like that on there. So I encourage you to go visit their site, and they're also completely funded by nonprofits. So your donations makes a huge difference. So support their efforts if you will. So, but the classic belief that they only come down in years whenever there's a food supply shortage. Well, that's the case when it comes to some of the other northern owls, like great gray owls, are erupt down here, and their big numbers are whenever there's a food failure in the north. And so it was easy to assume that snowy owls were in that same category, but really it isn't. It appears that the snowy owl movement tends to be larger whenever there's a huge success of a breeding season up there. So when they have a lot of lemmings, which they typically feed on, and their babies have a really high successful survival rate during the nesting season, those are the years that we tend to see big movements of snowy owls this far south. So they're a great bird, a great story. You can look for them all around the area. One of the best places is on top of power poles like this bird. They tend to be perched up on fence posts, but wide open country. That's where you really want to be looking for them. And the joke among bird watchers is I've been checking out a whole lot of plastic bags up in trees, and in fields here during this when I'm looking for snowy owls, because when you're looking for those birds right along out in the country wide open, and yeah, you see a white plastic bag on top of a hay bale, you stop and you look, you make sure, because that's a lot of times where you might find one sitting on top of a hay bale, sitting on top of a power pole. But open country is the key there. They tend to be, and sometimes you'll find one sitting in a tree, but that's not as common nearly as it is in the open country. So you can look for them now. A lot of times once they settle into an area, they're there for months. If we have them show up, I remember my first one in Missouri was sitting in a pasture up I-35. It was up on I-35, and it was sat there all winter, and we went up there many times, and it was way out in, so we could safely look at it from where there was a gas station there, and we had their back parking lot. We could actually look at it from there. You do not, please do not harass these birds. If you do find one, bird watchers have gotten to where they keep it secret now, because they whenever you tell people about it, and I'm sorry, I don't want to point fingers at the photographers out there, but seems to be the photographers who can't resist walking closer and closer and closer and closer to these birds and try to get better and better pictures, which does the bird no favor whatsoever. So, and if you make him fly, he's burning energy he doesn't need to burn. The number one mortality cause of snowy owls when they're down here in the winter are automobile strikes. And so if you're flushing these birds and you're making them fly, the chances just increases of them being killed. So if you do spot them, enjoy it, but please don't try to approach them. That's the best advice we can give you. So we love our snowy owls, and this is the time of year to look for them. If you see one, please call us. We'd like to know about it. We kind of keep records of it. And if you have other birds you want me to talk about, please send in ideas for future programs. Give us a like, give us a share. If on YouTube, please subscribe. Until then, come by and let's talk birds.